Have you ever been judged before you said a single word? Imagine being arrested for asking why, then watching your truth buried beneath a uniform and a lie. But what if the accused wasn't just any woman? What if she had the power to flip the courtroom upside down? In this true-to-life courtroom drama, you'll witness how one woman exposed a lie, turned the system on its head, and redefined what it means to fight for justice. Stay until the end to discover not only the twist that changed everything, but the truth that couldn't be silenced. If this is your first time here, welcome. We tell real stories that echo beyond the headlines. Stories that reveal truth, demand justice, and celebrate courage. If you believe these stories deserve to be heard, tap that subscribe button and join a growing community that refuses to look away. He thought he was in control. Badge polished, uniform crisp. The courtroom whispered his version of the truth like gospel until she stood up. Her name wasn't in the headlines yet. No one knew what she had survived. No one expected the woman sitting quietly at the defendant's table to bring an entire courtroom to a standstill. But when she spoke, everything changed. This is the story of a lie told under oath, of a woman painted as a threat, and the quiet storm that followed. It's about power, perception, and the moment truth demands to be seen. What happens when someone underestimated turns out to be someone unstoppable? What happens when the very system designed to silence a voice finds itself on trial? You're about to witness the unraveling of a false narrative, a story built on fear, authority, and assumption, and how a single woman's strength forced the world to listen. Her name? Ava Brooks. Retired Special Forces. Decorated. Relentless. And until that day in court, nobody knew. But after today, no one would forget. Stay with me. Because this isn't just about one woman. This is about what happens when the truth wears a uniform of its own. The morning sun filtered through tall windows, casting long, golden rays across the hardwood floors. Dust floated lazily in the beams of light, dancing in the stillness of a room about to erupt. The courtroom was beautiful in the way all institutions of power are, polished, cold, and intimidating. Dark oak benches lined the gallery, their age evident in their creaks. The air smelled faintly of varnish and old paper. But there was something else in the air that day tension. Whispers floated like static, hushed voices from local reporters, court staff, and curious townspeople who had shown up for what they thought would be a routine assault case. But even they could feel that something was different. At the defense table sat Ava Brooks. She didn't flinch, didn't shift, didn't blink too often. She wore a navy blazer, plain slacks, and a white button-down shirt with the collar pressed sharp. Her braided hair was pulled back neatly. From afar, she looked like any other defendant, quiet, maybe even vulnerable. But those who looked closely saw something else. Focus. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. Her back was straight. Her eyes scanned the room with a precision that was practiced, not paranoid. You could tell this woman had been under pressure before. Serious pressure. At the plaintiff's table sat Officer Grant Reynolds, the man who accused her. He wore his uniform like armor, every button perfect, every badge gleaming. He leaned back in his chair, legs casually apart, one arm slung over the chair beside him. He smirked when his name was whispered in the crowd. The confidence wasn't subtle, it oozed. Behind him, a line of fellow officers sat like a wall of blue. Some crossed their arms. Others nodded to Reynolds, signaling solidarity. This wasn't just a case, it was a performance. And presiding over it all, seated high behind the bench, was Judge Malcolm Reed, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, and utterly unreadable. He'd been on the bench longer than most of the attorneys in the room had been practicing law. He was known for his patience, but also for his bluntness. He didn't suffer dramatics. He'd seen too many of these cases end in bitter accusations and inconclusive evidence. Today, though, something in his expression said he knew this wouldn't be one of those days. With a bang of the gavel and a voice like dry thunder, Judge Reed brought the court to order, and just like that, the silence tightened. Bailiff called the plaintiff to the stand. Officer Grant Reynolds stood, adjusting his collar with practiced ease. He walked confidently, even leisurely, to the witness stand. As he swore his oath, he didn't look at Ava Brooks, not directly. Just once, a sideways glance. Smirk still intact. He sat down, cleared his throat, and leaned into the mic. On the night of October 3 Ard, he began. I was responding to a call about suspicious activity near Jefferson Avenue, close to the old warehouse district. It was past 11 o'clock p.m. The areas had break-ins before. He paused, letting the silence fill the room. That's when I saw the defendant, Miss Brooks. She was loitering outside a closed business, looking around, checking doors. I asked her to identify herself. She got aggressive, started yelling, refused to comply. He shook his head as if the memory still frustrated him. When I tried to calm her down, she shoved me hard, and that's when she went for my sidearm. I feared for my safety, so I restrained her, took her to the ground, and called for backup. For a few seconds, the courtroom was quiet, too quiet. Then the whispers began. A few murmurs from the gallery. One woman leaned into her friend and muttered, just loud enough. Sounds like a stretch. Someone else nodded. The judge banged his gavel once, not harshly, just enough. Ava Brooks didn't react. She sat still, eyes fixed on Officer Reynolds, hands never moving. Reynolds continued with a theatrical sigh. Look, I don't enjoy this. I've served this city for over a decade. I'm not quick to escalate. But in this case, I was dealing with a person who refused to follow simple commands and then physically threatened an officer. He turned slightly toward the jury, gesturing to them not dramatically, but deliberately. I don't care about color or gender. I care about compliance. And when people resist, people get hurt. The prosecutor gave him a nod of approval. Across the courtroom, Ava's attorney, Daniel Wright, was already flipping through his notes, his expression unreadable. He shifted in his seat, glanced at Ava, then back at the judge. He stood slowly. Your Honor, if I may. Judge Reed cut him off without looking up. Save it for cross, Mr. Wright. Daniel sat back down, jaw clenched. Reynolds finished his testimony with one last appeal. All I want is to do my job. Keep this city safe. That's all I've ever done. He stepped down. As he walked past Ava. He didn't smile this time. He didn't have to, because for now his story was the only one the jury had heard. Daniel Wright sat stiffly at the defense table, one hand resting on a legal pad filled with notes, none of which seemed useful now. His tie felt a little too tight, and the sweat forming at his brow had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. He glanced at his client, Ava Brooks. She hadn't moved since Officer Reynolds finished his testimony. Her expression was unreadable, her breathing slow and steady, like she was preparing for something much bigger than a trial. She leaned toward him slightly and whispered, low enough that no one else could hear. Focus. Stay sharp. They only win if we fall apart. Her voice was calm, but beneath that calm was steel. Daniel gave a slight nod, straightened in his chair, and rose to his feet. The courtroom watched him, many expecting nothing more than a last-ditch defense. But Daniel had something else in mind. He walked to the center of the courtroom, slow, controlled, deliberate. He paused, made eye contact with the jury, and said, We've all heard stories today. Some told with confidence, some with conviction. But a confident lie is still a lie, so let's do something different. Let's stop listening to stories and start looking at facts. He turned toward the judge and gave a respectful nod. The defense would like to call Ava Brooks to the stand. A few murmurs passed through the gallery. The sound of shifting seats echoed in the silence as Ava stood. She moved with quiet certainty, not fast, not showy. Just precise, she stepped onto the witness stand, took the oath without hesitation, and adjusted the microphone once before meeting the gaze of the room. And just like that, the temperature in the courtroom shifted. The storm hadn't started, but the air was thick with the promise of it. Daniel Wright stood before the witness box, hands clasped lightly in front of him. He didn't rush. This wasn't about theatrics. It was about truth and letting it speak for itself. He looked at Ava. "Miss Brooks," he began, "can you walk us through what happened that night, in your own words?" Ava adjusted the mic, her voice clear, but not loud. Steady. Controlled. "I was heading home after visiting a friend. I'd taken a wrong turn and pulled over to check my GPS. It was late, and I didn't know the area. I parked by the old tire shop on Jefferson. That's when Officer Reynolds approached." Daniel nodded, motioning for her to continue. He shined his flashlight straight into my face and asked what I was doing. His tone was sharp, more accusation than question. I told him I was checking directions. He immediately asked for ID. I asked him why. I hadn't done anything illegal. I wasn't trespassing. I wasn't blocking traffic. I just wanted to know what I had done wrong. She paused, her fingers gently folded together on the wooden railing. That's when everything changed. He raised his voice, told me I was being difficult. I tried to explain again, calmly. But before I could finish, he grabbed my wrist. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The judge didn't call for order this time. I asked him to let go. I told him I hadn't done anything. He leaned in close and said, "She took a breath. Women like you need to learn your place." Gasps broke out. The sound was immediate, real. Daniel waited, then asked gently, "Did you physically resist him at that point?" "No, not until he yanked my arm and shoved me against his patrol car. I told him he was hurting me. I said I didn't consent to being touched, that I hadn't done anything wrong. He cuffed me anyway." Daniel stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice as if inviting the jury to listen harder. "Did you ever raise your voice?" "No." "Did you ever reach for his weapon?" "Absolutely not." She sat taller in the chair now, not out of defiance, but out of conviction. He needed a reason to justify his actions. So he made one up. "I've served in places where violence was part of survival, where every second mattered. And I was trained not to escalate, to assess, to respond." The room was silent again. Daniel leaned on the witness stand, but not too close. "You were trained?" "In what capacity?" "Military," she said, then paused. Her eyes moved from Daniel to the jury. "I served in the United States Armed Forces for 20 years. Special Reconnaissance Division. Retired at the rank of lieutenant commander." Gasps turned into full disbelief. One juror leaned back in their chair. Someone in the gallery whispered, "She's military?" Daniel nodded, but said nothing. Ava continued, "I've been in war zones. I've carried out operations in environments most people can't imagine. And in all that time, I never had to use force unless I absolutely had to. That night, I wasn't a soldier. I was just a woman trying to get home. And I was treated like a threat because I asked a question." Her voice didn't crack. It didn't rise. But it carried more power than anything Officer Reynolds had said all morning. Daniel turned back to the jury. "So, let me ask plainly, did you attack Officer Reynolds?" "No." "Did you pose a threat to him at any point?" "No." "Then why do you think this happened?" Ava exhaled. Not from fatigue, but from restraint, because some people see silence as guilt, and calm as weakness. He thought I was someone he could push around, someone no one would believe. He was wrong. Daniel let her final words hang there. The judge adjusted his glasses. The prosecutor stared down at his notes, expression stiff, and the jury? They weren't just hearing her anymore. They were feeling her. The prosecutor stood with his arms crossed, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "So let me get this straight," he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "You want this court to believe that you, a civilian woman stopped outside a tire shop, somehow posed no threat to a trained officer. You expect us to believe all of this?" The gallery rustled. A few quiet chuckles. One officer in the back row shook his head. Ava Brooks didn't move. She didn't blink. Instead, she looked toward the jury. Not at them, but into them. And when she spoke, her voice was soft. But it cut through the noise like steel. "You see a woman. You see a defendant. But you don't see who I am." She paused just long enough to let the weight build. Then came the words no one expected. "I am Commander Ava Brooks, United States Special Forces. Retired. 20 years of service. Honorably discharged." The courtroom froze for half a second. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. The judge, mid-note, stopped writing. His pen hung in the air. In the jury box, a middle-aged woman gasped and covered her mouth. Another leaned forward, eyes wide, as if trying to see Ava more clearly, as if they hadn't really seen her at all until now. In the back row, Officer Reynolds sat up straighter. The smirk that had carried him through the entire hearing vanished, replaced by something closer to dread. The prosecutor opened his mouth, but no words came out. "And Ava?" She simply straightened her posture and rested her hands on the edge of the witness stand. She wasn't defending herself anymore. She was reclaiming the narrative, and for the first time that day, the courtroom wasn't judging her. It was listening. The glow from the street lamp outside Ava's house flickered gently in the early evening air. Daniel Wright stepped out of his car, still in his wrinkled dress shirt, tie loosened, briefcase in hand. His nerves hadn't left him since court adjourned hours ago. The day's revelations echoed in his mind, unresolved and heavy. He knocked on her door twice. Ava opened it almost immediately. She wore a navy sweatshirt and black athletic pants, comfortable, grounded. Her hair was tied back. No courtroom poise. Just real. "Come in," she said softly. Inside, the house was quiet. Minimalist. Clean. No distractions. And then Daniel saw it. Over the mantel, in a glass display, a folded American flag. Below it, a row of medals. Beside that, a photograph Ava in full military gear, standing next to a dust-covered Humvee. Her eyes in the photo. The same quiet fire he'd seen in court. Daniel approached slowly. "You live alone?" he asked softly. "For now," Ava replied. He looked back at her. "So, it's true. You really were, she corrected. "It doesn't leave you." "Not really." She stepped to a shelf and pulled down a leather binder, its edges worn, the clasp almost broken. "My service record," she said. "Everything you need to see." Daniel opened it. Slowly. What he found inside stopped him cold. Dozens of mission briefs. Commendations for leadership under fire. Deployment photos from overseas. A commendation signed by the Secretary of Defense. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked, his voice low, eyes still on the documents. "We could have led with this. Shut the whole thing down in 5 minutes." Ava sat down across from him. "Because this case isn't about who I was. It's about what Officer Reynolds thought he saw." Daniel looked up, a woman alone. At night. Easy to intimidate. Ava nodded. Exactly. He thought I wouldn't push back. Thought no one would listen. He didn't see a veteran. Or a commander. He saw a statistic. She leaned forward. I needed them to hear my story before they saw my uniform. Because if they only respect me, because I served, what does that say about how they see everyone else? Daniel nodded slowly, realization sinking in. So what do we do tomorrow? He asked. Ava gave a small smile, the corners of her mouth just barely lifting. We tell the whole truth. All of it. Not to win, but to make sure no one else gets buried in silence again. The room fell into silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was the silence of two people preparing for war. Not with guns or violence, but with truth. The room had settled into a quiet hum, tense, watchful, until Daniel Wright stood and held up a small black USB drive between his fingers. Your Honor, he said, voice firm but respectful. The defense would like to submit new evidence. The prosecutor shot up. Objection. This is highly irregular. The defense is required to. Judge Reed raised a single hand. Silence fell like a stone. Let's see what you've got, Mr. Wright. Daniel handed the drive to the bailiff, who walked it to the media tech at the side of the courtroom. Fingers tapped quickly on a keyboard. The screen flickered to life. The judge leaned forward. The jury shifted in their seats. This footage, Daniel explained, was recorded by a bystander at the scene. They came forward yesterday evening after recognizing the defendant's face on the local news. The screen showed a shaky image captured from the inside of a car parked nearby. The angle was imperfect, the lighting grainy, but the audio was clear. Officer Reynolds stood in the frame, gripping Ava's wrist with one hand while the other hovered near his belt. Ava's voice was calm but firm. I'm not resisting. Reynolds didn't pause. I said don't talk. Just obey. The courtroom exploded. Gasps. Murmurs. A ripple of outrage rolling through the gallery like thunder. Reynolds, at the plaintiff's table, leaned forward suddenly, elbows on the wood. His confident posture dissolved. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly open. The judge banged his gavel. Order. I will have order in this courtroom. But no one was listening. All eyes were still on the screen. The video continued. Ava was pressed against the patrol car. She did not push back, did not scream. She simply said, You're hurting me. Reynolds replied, louder this time. Should have thought of that before you got smart with me. The screen went black. Daniel turned to the judge. The defense rests, Your Honor. But no one else in the room had. Not yet, because the video had cracked something, not just the story, but the wall of silence surrounding it. The courtroom was still recovering when Judge Reed called the next phase, Mr. Wright, he said, you may proceed with cross-examination. Daniel stood slowly, approached the witness stand where Officer Reynolds now sat tenser than before, his hands clenched, knuckles pale. He adjusted his collar, but it didn't help. The courtroom wasn't cold, he was just sweating now. Daniel began simply, Officer Reynolds, earlier you stated that Miss Brooks became physically aggressive with you. Is that still your position? Reynolds nodded quickly, yes. She was noncompliant and confrontational. Daniel held up a court transcript. You also stated under oath that she attempted to reach for your weapon, correct? Daniel took a step closer, and you had no body cam footage to support that claim, correct? It malfunctioned. Yes, Reynolds said, tone firmer now. Tech said it happens sometimes. Of course, Daniel said flatly. And were there any other officers on the scene at the time? No, I arrived first. So no witnesses to corroborate your account? No, but I followed protocol. Daniel stopped pacing. Turned to the jury. Let's talk about protocol. He gestured toward the monitor where the bystander footage had just played. In that video, did the jury see the suspect attack you? No, but did she resist? Threaten you? Raise her voice? Not everything's on the video, Reynolds replied sharply. You didn't see how she was before I tried to detain her. So you're saying the video doesn't tell the whole story? Exactly. Daniel walked back to the defense table and picked up a single sheet of paper. Officer Reynolds, are you aware that the woman you handcuffed has 20 years of military service? I wasn't aware of that at the time, so when you claimed she was a threat, you were referring to a retired Special Forces commander. Checking her phone. Reynolds blinked. I didn't know that, but you knew she was calm. You knew she didn't swing at you. You knew she never reached for your weapon. Silence. Didn't you? The courtroom leaned in. Reynolds swallowed hard. She didn't act like a soldier. Daniel turned, his tone suddenly razor sharp. And you didn't act like a peace officer. Gasps. Someone in the jury nodded. Daniel's voice dropped to a quiet intensity. You saw a black woman who questioned you. That's all it took. I was doing my job. No, Officer Reynolds. You were abusing your badge. And now everyone sees it. Judge Reed let the silence hang for a moment before clearing his throat. No further questions? No, Your Honor. Reynolds stepped down, his shoulders hunched, his steps uncertain. He entered the courtroom as the accuser. Now, he looked like a man being judged. Daniel Wright stood once more, facing the jury not with anger, but with controlled conviction. You've heard the officer's story. You've seen the video. But this case isn't just about Grant Reynolds. He took a step closer to the jury box. This is about the system that allowed him to act without fear. The silence that let it happen over and over again. He held up a folder. These are internal affairs reports, filed over the last 7 years, all connected to Officer Reynolds. Murmurs began to rise again. Unlawful detainment, excessive force, use of racial slurs. Most of them quietly dismissed. The rest settled before ever reaching court. Daniel walked slowly past the jury, his voice measured. You see, this isn't just a one-time mistake. This is a pattern, a learned behavior, enabled by a system more concerned with protecting itself than holding its members accountable. He turned toward the gallery every time a complaint was buried, every time an incident was covered. They told him, you're safe. You won't be challenged. So he didn't just believe it, he acted on it. Daniel looked at Ava, then back at the jury. And if this woman hadn't been a retired Special Forces officer, if she hadn't stood her ground with the training and discipline of a war veteran, would we even be here today? Ava stood slowly, her voice calm, controlled. Cutting. If I wasn't who I am, would anyone have believed me? Silence. Real. Heavy. Undeniable. Daniel closed the folder and looked each juror in the eye. This is bigger than one man. It's about what we allow. When we look the other way, the judge nodded toward the defense table. Ava Brooks rose. She didn't rush. She didn't smile. She didn't raise her voice. She walked with the quiet confidence of someone who led people through darkness and come out alive. She stood before the jury alone, but she had never looked stronger. Ladies and gentlemen, she began. I served this country for 2 decades, in places where democracy was just a word, where freedom was fragile, where justice was a rumor. She paused, and I did it proudly, because I believed in what this country could be. I believed in our values, not just abroad, but here, right here, in courtrooms like this one, where truth should never have to beg to be heard. She looked down for just a moment, then raised her gaze again. But what happened to me happens to too many. Because when you wear the wrong skin, or stand in the wrong place, or ask the wrong question, you're not seen as a citizen. You're seen as a problem. And when those with power go unchecked, it's not just dangerous, it's fatal. A beat. Her voice didn't crack. It sharpened. I didn't resist. I didn't threaten. I asked why, and for that, I was thrown against a car and called defiant. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I refused to shrink. She looked directly at the officer in the plaintiff's seat. He lowered his gaze. Some people say I should have just obeyed. That if I had complied, none of this would have happened, but we don't live in a country where obedience is the price for dignity. At least, we shouldn't. The room was silent. No one shifted. No one breathed. I'm proud of my service. But I shouldn't need a uniform to be respected. I shouldn't have to be a soldier to be heard. She turned back to the jury, because before I was a commander, I was a daughter, a sister, a neighbor, a citizen. And I still am. That's who stood outside that shop. That's who asked for a reason. That's who was silenced. Another pause. This trial isn't about my past. It's about our future. She took a breath, steady and grounded. You have the power to say this isn't normal, that it won't be accepted, that it ends here, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been told to shut up and obey. She stepped back slowly because justice doesn't wear a badge. It doesn't wear a uniform. Justice wears truth. And with that, Ava returned to her seat, her chin high. Her silence louder than any applause could have been. The jury filed back into the courtroom with slow, steady steps, 12 faces. Some tight with tension, some unreadable. But none of them looked at Officer Reynolds. The room was still. The kind of stillness that holds its breath. Judge Reed turned to the foreperson. Has the jury reached a verdict? She nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. Please read it. The woman unfolded a piece of paper, her hand steady. In the matter of the state versus Ava Brooks, we find the defendant not guilty on all charges. The words dropped like thunder. Gasps. Sobs. Applause breaking out in pockets before the gavel slammed. Order, Judge Reed called. But even he wasn't hiding the slight curve in the corner of his mouth. The foreperson continued. Furthermore, we recommend that the court pursue a formal investigation into the conduct of Officer Grant Reynolds. This time, the silence was on Reynolds. He didn't blink, didn't move, because in that moment, he knew. The badge wouldn't protect him this time. Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with people. Journalists with microphones, cell phones held high, supporters holding signs, voices chanting. The door opened. Ava stepped into the sunlight. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. She raised a hand, not to silence them, but to steady the moment. This, she said, her voice clear over the crowd, is for everyone who's ever been told to stay silent. We're done being silent. The headlines came fast. Officer under investigation for civil rights violations. Video footage sparks citywide review of arrest protocols. Veteran cleared after viral courtroom twist. Within weeks, Grant Reynolds was placed on administrative leave. Within months, he was fired. And when the investigation into his past conduct began to unfold, more complaints surfaced. More names. More stories. He had gotten away with it until now, but the story didn't end with him. Ava Brooks, once seen as a defendant, became something more. She didn't seek fame. She didn't launch a campaign, but she began to speak. At universities, at town halls, at rallies for police accountability and justice reform, she spoke not as a veteran, but as a citizen. A woman who refused to be dehumanized. A voice that wouldn't be ignored, and as the movement around her grew, one truth remained. She never asked to be a symbol. She just refused to be erased. The fight for justice doesn't end in a courtroom. It continues in conversations, in communities, in courage. If this story moved you, if it made you feel, think, or see the world differently, don't let it stop here. Like this video. Subscribe to the channel. Because we tell real stories of truth, resilience, and the people who refuse to be silenced, truth isn't just powerful, it's unstoppable, and together, so are we.